Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We have a pretty packed house this afternoon. Thank you all for being here. So we're switching up the agenda a little bit because the secretary has a little bit more flexibility than we originally thought. And we've invited Jen Carby from Legislative Council to give us just a brief review, because it's been a couple of years since this act was passed, about what the intent of the act is and what we were expecting to receive. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. Jen Carby from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Excuse me just a minute, Jen, I should say. In welcoming everyone here, it's a joint hearing between the House Healthcare Committee and the House Human Services Committee. And we appreciate everybody's attention, especially as the implications of anything in the Agency of Human Services are very far reaching and impact many thousands of Vermonters, and someone might say all Vermonters, given the public health focus at the Department of Health. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who is here, as well as the people who are listening. And you have anything?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting us, Chair Wood.
Awesome.
Looking forward to this.
Thank you, Jen.
Sure. Again, Jennifer Carby, Office of Legislative Counsel. And I will put the act language up on the screen. I'm not going to read it all to you, but we will just remind ourselves what this act was and what it called for. This was Act 119 of 2024, an act relating to re-envisioning the Agency of Human Services. It started out with some findings and a purpose, findings about the history of Vermont's Agency of Human Services, and then the purpose of the act being to create a meaningful process through which the agency, its departments, and the individuals and organizations with whom they engage can collaborate to identify opportunities, to build on past successes, and to make improvements for the future. And it directed the Secretary of Human Services, in collaboration with the commissioners of each of the departments, in consultation with a number of other stakeholders, was directed to consider options for re-envisioning the agency, such as restructuring it or dividing it into two or more separate agencies. So it directed the secretary and stakeholders to evaluate the current structure of the agency, identify potential options for re-envisioning it, engage in cost-benefit analysis of each option, and come up with one or more recommendations for implementation. Directed the agency to solicit feedback from the stakeholders and engage existing boards, committees, and other channels to collect input from individuals and families who are directly impacted. By February 1st of last year, the secretary was to present to various committees, including these two committees, an update on the status of the stakeholder process and the development of recommendations, with a final report and recommendations due by November 1st of 2025. Including the rationale for the option or options recommended, the likely impact of them on the departments in the agency and the Vermonters served by those departments, how the recommendations would center the needs of and lead to better outcomes for individuals and families and make the agency more accountable, how the recommendations could improve collaboration, integration, and alignment of services currently provided by the agency and its departments, and enhance coordination and communication among the departments and with community partners. How the recommendations could address the workforce and personnel capacity challenges facing the agency and its departments. How the recommendations could address facility challenges. How the recommendations could strengthen the use of technology. A transition and implementation plan for the recommendations designed to minimize confusion and disruptions. Proposed organizational chart for any recommended reconfigurations, and the estimated costs or savings associated with recommendations. That is what you are going to hear about from the agency today.
Great. Are there any questions for Jen about what the intended purpose or the purpose of the act? Great. Thank you so much, Jen. Appreciate it. And then we're very fortunate to have the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services here, Vinnie Samuelson, and welcome to the table. And if you have more people you want to bring with you, then we have spare chairs. And members of the public or members here, you can find a testimony of Secretary Samuelson on probably on both committees' websites, but I know it's on the House Human Services and is on the House Healthcare Committee if you are looking to follow along.
So chairs, thank you for having us here today and across the room. This is a really exciting opportunity for us. As you've heard, the Act 119 report, and again, I'm Jenny Samuelson, I'm the Secretary of Agency of Human Services for the record. I'm joined here by Jacqueline Holden and Ted Fisher, both from the agency, both of whom actually did the research and the work on the report. So this is a really exciting opportunity for us as an agency. So we're an organization that strives to continuously improve, to grow, and to evaluate our organization. And we use this as an opportunity to really dig in, both as you saw here, to structural changes and other programmatic and operational changes that we could do to improve our agency. We're going to walk through the methodology in detail so folks understand how we work through this, and we're going to walk through the recommendations. This report was just completed. Today, we're not really in a position to walk through the implementation and next steps, but we would be happy to take questions and come back with the appropriate departments. I am today speaking on behalf of our entire executive leadership team at the agency, which includes myself and the 6 commissioners and the deputy secretary. This was an all-agency effort and an all-agency report. So again, to revisit the purpose, it really is to create a meaningful process which the agency and its departments and individual organizations with whom we engage can collaborate to identify opportunities to build on past successes and to make improvements for the future. As I mentioned, we really took this very seriously. We went in depth. We tried to ask a lot of questions, starting from a very open-ended perspective and getting down into the details with our departments. We wanted to make sure that we really heard from a broad group of stakeholders, including our staff, the people that we serve in the agencies that represent them, and the organizations that really deliver services on the ground in Vermont. So a broad breadth. And as you can imagine, there were many areas where we heard consensus, and there were some areas where we could hear broad set of goals that people wanted to achieve, but lacked full consensus on actually how to achieve them. And so we will point out those areas. But overall, it was a really good process to help identify how we can continue to improve as an organization. As a reminder, the Agency of Human Services is the largest executive branch agency. It represents more than 40% of employees and has one of the largest budgets. We serve hundreds of thousands of Vermonters through direct service, and we provide services and support for all Vermonters across, as we really have both a health and a public health mission across the agency, not just in the Department of Health, but across every single one of our departments. AHS directly serves and oversees contracts. Much of the work of the agency is delivered by valued partner organizations on the ground and in communities. And so with a lot of this work and the work of the agency isn't just from the 4,000 employees that we have within the agency, but really represents many, many more people on the ground working with clients. It's home to programs that directly serve Vermonters. As I said, hundreds of thousands of Vermonters and families statewide, and has significant impacts, and that I don't want to minimize, on their health, well-being, economic vitality. And so it was really important for us to really look across the breadth there. One of the things to acknowledge, and I believe that this is why over time, not just this time, but many times, we've been asked to continue to evaluate us as an agency, and it's in the codifying legislation, is that we've changed significantly in both our charge, our mission, and the depth of our programs from 1970 when we were created. That represents the intersect between health and healthcare and human services. Many of you have heard me talk about health-related social needs and the impact of housing on health and the impact of food on health. And that's why we were put together as one agency But again, that has evolved significantly. There's also been a significant increase in not just the scope, but the complexity of the work and the systems that do that work on the ground. And so I do think it's important for us to iteratively evaluate our structure and our purpose. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, both of whom I just want to say led this work with a whole team. But I just want to congratulate them for a job well done in terms of the depth that they went into, particularly because this wasn't a funded initiative. And so they stepped up and they stepped out of what they usually do and really, I think, did a robust process. So on that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack.
Thank you, Secretary. Hello, everyone. This is my first time. I'm Jacqueline Holden. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Performance Improvement for the Agency of Human Services, and I sit in the Secretary's office. So I will talk about sort of the process that we went through for this report. These were the project phases. Broadly speaking, we went from our initial, obviously, initiation and planning, which Ted and I both were part of, starting that in around September of 2024. Wow, okay. And then we did our, broad information gathering phase, which included open comment feedback from both staff, partners, public, and others. And that led into some more focused information gathering through specific focus groups, advocacy groups that are really proximal to the work we do, and others. You can see in there the interim report was during that time, at which time we gave an update on the process through which we were doing this work. After that, once we started to get a lot of the information in, we began the analysis, which was an iterative process. So even before we had a complete set of all of our data and all of our input, we started doing some analysis, which then informed our next steps and what the rest of our sort of feedback and information gathering would be. Analysis continued through about June, and we also started to do some interpretation of the information coming out of there. So not just, a summary of the comments received, but really what that meant is what we mean by interpretation, moving out of our analysis. From there, we did a prioritization process, which included, again, reaching out to staff, partners, the public, clients, anyone really who wanted to participate. We did just an open survey of people to look at the feedback we had gathered and the broad themes of what we had seen and help us prioritize what was most important to the people that are really involved and impacted by our work. From there, we use those priorities to sort of move us forward to the results and options where we looked at what we can really do with that information to put something into action or to make changes, and then looking at those sort of really assessing which one of those would be the most beneficial relative to sort of the amount of work, the feasibility, and the likelihood of success and sustainability moving forward. And that led us to our recommendations, which were part of the final report in November of last year. And then beyond, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So then just a little more detail about the process. For outreach and engagement, we did, as I said, discussion groups, surveys, many interviews. We had over 1,000 people who engaged with us and participated in that information gathering. That included staff, that included leaders from the agency, from all of our departments, that included partners that work closely with us, those organizations that deliver the services like the Secretary was talking about, advocacy groups that represent our clients, and more. Public comment was also received. It was generally anonymous. Some chose to identify the organizations from which they were representing or speaking. Some were completely anonymous. So it was a broad set of information that we received, which was really valuable, and really, I think the true value of it and what we really got was related to the experience of people. There was not a lot of, this is the solution, or we think you should do this. It was more, this is what it means to me to work for AHS and how I experience that as an employee or as somebody who receives services. These are the issues that I see, these are the benefits that I see. This is what has been really helpful for me, that you should continue to do, and these are the things that would be our opportunities that I see in the way I'm impacted by the agency. In addition to sort of that broad feedback gathering, we also included research on the operational data and metrics of the organization, AHS and its departments. We looked at peer states and how their human services programs operated, their structure, the way they put together their programs and grouped them, the way that they delivered them and coordinated between the various types of human services that are delivered across most states. We looked at organizational theory, generally what is the best way to handle sort of cross collaboration, but also some sort of hierarchy and feeding up so that information and decision making happens optimally and collaboratively. Generally, an organization's design should really reflect the purpose of the organization and the outcomes it desires. And then we also did a historical review of the agency, a lot of which was in the original bill as introduced, which was very informative. And all of that sort of helped us develop and iteratively continue to ask deeper and deeper questions of the people that we engaged with based on what we learned along the way. We got further down into specific interviews of specific groups or specific people who were subject matter experts or had very clear depth of understanding of the agency and the work that's done. As I said, for the analysis, it was iterative over time as we got more information. We did a thematic analysis, given some of the constraints in resources and also the way that the information would be more useful. We analyzed at a thematic level so that we could see what really the highlights were, what we were hearing most often. And then that could help us be a starting point from which we could look into the detail as far as in this broad thematic area, what specifically are we hearing as far as what's working well? What are maybe opportunities for us to work differently? And then as that moved forward, we began validating those themes with our continued engagement with more and more groups and a little deeper analysis to ensure that the themes that we had come up with really were reflective of the breadth of information and feedback that we received. And then finally, as I mentioned, our prioritization was through a couple of surveys. Mostly we sent one to staff and then also an external survey, which we tried to push out as much as possible to gather as much feedback as we could around, as I said, of those themes. What are really the most important to the people who experience the agency in whatever way that they interact and experience our services, the way we operate. And that really helped us come to the options and recommendations. So from those priorities, we started to look to the options and what we might be able to do to address those opportunities on the ground. We again looked at sort of what those options might be more broadly and then narrowed them as we did that more research and validated those with, again, people who were a little more intimately involved and informed about impacts through clients and also people who, like the secretary, had served in positions that had a very broad and deep overview of the organization. And then we also looked at those options through sort of a broad cost benefit kind of analysis. You see some of that here, the criteria we looked at to get to recommendations, outcomes, sustainability, impact on clients, alignment with other priorities and other challenges or opportunities that we know were priorities across the state. Feasibility, resource constraints, and statute, what if there are regulatory or statutory constraints or things that we needed to be aware of as other impacts. And taking all of these together broadly, it really became sort of a broad cost benefit, including in the cost, those impacts, and also the change management costs that would come with broad strokes, large reorganization of an agency as large as ours. potential disruption to services for clients near term and long term, potential disruption to processes, sustainability, and organization for staff, and the way our organization operates collaboratively between departments and programs. So all of that together sort of informed where we got to in these recommendations. So we'll move on to.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Ted Fisher. I'm the Principal Assistant and Communications Director for the Agency of Human Services. Thank you for having us here today. I'm going to go over the findings and recommendations section with you all. To just start where Jacqueline left off here, we received a really very broad scope of feedback from high-level conceptual, broad systems considerations. People had clearly been thinking about things for a lot of time and energy into kind of thinking about their ideas, to folks who had very specific and granular feedback. I need this thing changed. This is not working in my specific program or my specific unit, or this particular program that is not helping the clients that I serve, those kind of things. So they get really broad brushstrokes, and we intentionally asked that when we came out. We didn't say, hey, should we break up the Agency of Human Services? We really asked folks to tell us what they thought the biggest challenges and opportunities were throughout that process, as Jacqueline mentioned. So very specific ideas to comments from the small scale changes. So the framework that we're going to go through here in terms of the recommendations kind of reflects that broad scope. But I want to state up front before we go deeper into our recommendations that much of what we've heard doesn't speak directly to the structural elements of the charge of the act. We heard a lot of things that was useful in that context, but wasn't, hey, it would be better if we reorganized part of the agency. And so that's where the methodology that Jacqueline was just talking about was really helpful for us to try to put together the pieces of evidence so that we could take the problems, challenges, and opportunities in context, the big picture challenges, the more specific and actionable things, and sort of feed them all together in terms of what the implications of the organization. Just want to say up front that everything we heard was thoughtful, insightful, focused on how to improve the lives of Vermonters, improve the services we provide, or support and empower our agency employees. We work with a really amazing group of people at AHS. Our staff are really thoughtful about this. They engaged really meaningfully in this process. Similarly, the members of the public and the partners and stakeholders that we worked with also really engaged with us in a really thoughtful manner. So I'll just say personally, I had joined the agency right around the time this act was being passed, coming from a sister agency in state government. So this was kind of my introduction to AHS, which was a really awesome thing to get to know the agency that I was coming to work for. So just to reiterate one thing that Jacqueline pointed out, input represented how different people interact with and experience the agency, from clients and advocates. We interact with service processes, but don't know or care about the agency structure. To the former AHS secretaries who lived the structure and relationships of AHS as an agency level to their day-to-day. So we just cast a really broad net. And we came up with a structure from all of this feedback, big and small, comprehensive and specific, strategic and tactical, to generate a cycle of recommendations that speaks to the themes, challenges, and opportunities we identified during our process. So I'm going to go over the tier structure you see in front of us and go a little bit over that now, and then we'll kind of dive into it a little bit more in detail. So tier one opportunities include those that need the highest level of decision-making authority and scope. So this includes this category is also where potential solutions could include legislative remedies. So this is kind of speaking to the broad charge of the act, if you will. But we learned a lot that was not specific necessarily to the need for legislative change. So we have two additional tiers. And tier two opportunities really speaks to agency-wide change initiatives, options where AHS executive leadership can advance internal reforms, including, for example, strengthening workforce supports, leadership development or hiring pipelines, improving communication, transparency, and interdepartmental collaboration, modernizing technology and data infrastructure, strategically aligning program and budget planning processes, all of these are really big things for us to do, and we need to work on them internally and prioritize and figure out how to take them forward. But they're not ones that that sort of have an aspect legislative action. With that, we're gonna pass out we have a visual aid. Jacqueline mentioned the themes development we use, both to organize the feedback we received and also to do the prioritization and kind of the second phase of our outreach. So we're gonna pass this out to you all. I think we have enough copies. You're welcome to dive in. This is also available on our website. It's like Brendan is gonna help us. Thanks, Brendan. We'll go over the winners in terms of the most popular items that we heard about in our prioritization process when we go over tier 2 recommendations. And this will guide kind of the agency's internal process, next steps in terms of what we want to tackle for the tier 2 going forward.
Can we stop and just ask if there are any questions before you know, kind of jump it just about process? Because you
Absolutely.
pretty clearly defined the process that you use, and now we're kind of getting to results. So yes, go ahead, Representative Tina.
Yeah. Is there a place, I noticed that as part of the process, you talked about, it was mentioned that about the history, like what led to Agency of Human Services, what led to the current configuration. And there, I tried looking and I couldn't find anywhere publicly where the origin of the Agency of Human Services before 1970 is clearly articulated, and I don't want to do that now, but there are places we can go that you're aware of where that knowledge is stored, where you understand the roots of the agency.
Thank you, Representative. That's a really great question. And we asked that question fairly early on in our process, and the short answer is that there isn't.
The legislation that currently exists, I think, does one of the best jobs in summarizing the goals. And you all did a fabulous job in writing and developing that and capturing history.
So, yeah, so as the Secretary said, the purpose statement of Act 119 has a really good high level, like concise, but also very rich overview of that history. We dove a little bit deeper to try to understand some of that, but it took some work to do so. So there isn't, unfortunately, a really good summary beyond what is already in your act, and I would say that's pretty comprehensive. So.
Great. Just for members, we had some difficulty in loading the actual report. It is on the Human Services webpage now. I'm not sure it's probably getting on the healthcare website. So what was previously there was the February 2025 update. So the November 1 report is now there if you want to take a look at it. Other questions from members? Go ahead, Representative McGill.
Yeah, I was just wondering, would it be possible to share like a blank copy of the survey you sent out? Sure. That'd be great.
And the survey was I think one of the things that Jacqueline did a good job, but I want to reiterate, is that it was an iterative process. The first thing we did was gather like broad themes. And we did that each time. We made sure that we had a way to do that from the public. So there was people could make comments from our website, from the webpage. We also gathered information through surveys and interviews. Once we had the themes, we then clarified the niche and asked folks, are these themes the right things? Did we miss anything? And then after that, we said, okay, and what should we do about it? And we did, that's where we did both the research externally and internally. So what should we do? What should we do about it? And then we went back to and said, did we get this right again? And so that's what she means by iterative. It was broad themes. Did we get it right? Okay, what should we do about it? Did we get that right? I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. There are members who have a question? Yes, okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just got two quick questions. Did AHS formally evaluate whether DOC should remain within AHS as part of the restructuring review?
So let's say we will get to that in a minute. What you will see in the next few slides is a set of recommendations. Again, remember, we gathered themes. To directly answer Representative McGuire, your question, it didn't actually, we thought maybe that would come up. First thing came up really strongly. I'm going to do a little spoiler alert. Was what should we do as an agency?
And everyone, like, there was broad consensus that we shouldn't break up the agency. And remember at the beginning, I said there were areas where we had consensus and when we didn't, and we would highlight that. There was broad consensus, and we'll go through the reasons why. The second thing that came up immediately was the conversation about substance use and mental health and the lack of integration. That was an area where we didn't have, like, everyone identified it as a problem. And they identified it early and often throughout the process. I think because we were still kind of coming out of legislative session, that was a question from last year, it brought it to the forefront. And there wasn't consensus there. What we saw, though, was the majority of the people that we talked to talked about integration and integration of those two systems. The Department of Health and some of the providers that they work with were a little bit more skeptical. And so I want to be honest, that one came up early, it came up often, and there was not always consensus. So that gave us really the insight that we needed to dig in deeper in terms of the how, not necessarily the what. Everyone agreed on the what, but the how. After that, the conversation about DCF came up. It wasn't until we got towards the very end that we started hearing anything about DOC. And it wasn't often, it wasn't early. And that was another area where there wasn't always consensus. The majority of the people so when we heard it, we amplified it. We made sure we visited every single one of the DOC facilities. We talked to probation and parole. And for a small subset, particularly of the more seasoned staff, we heard, does DOC's mission align with the agency? And some of the folks are like, we're not sure. Is it public safety? Is it human services? When we amplified the question and asked it more clearly, we heard from a broad set of stakeholders that they felt like that DOC really delivered human services and needed to stay connected to the agency, and that we weren't fully leveraging that. And that was a key theme that came out. And we heard from many staff in probation and parole that it was really essential for their work to keep the two things together. And we heard from many of the newer staff who are really working through the culture of really making sure that what we're doing in DOC is really restorative. We heard from them that they felt like there was value, but that they needed more growth and development. So we'll go through that, but I want to make sure that as we go through these areas, that I want to highlight early and often, agencies should stay together. Question about substance use and mental health, question about DCF, they came up. The DOC one was, even though we amplified it, was a much less substantive area of recommendation for change than the other three. So that they're not all the recommendations were created equally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to a degree, and I understand fully the perspective of it is more practical and rational and applicable to keep DOC under the umbrella of AHS. If we want to use that, it's very much ingrained. My hope with all of that is that keeping DOC, is it going to advance the goals of Act 117 in regards to being more efficient, accountable, and coordinated of services as you outlined? That's what, all right, Mel, leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, I want to give a concrete example because we could stay up here at the ethereal level, right? But I happened to, for Capital for a Day, we were visiting EMS. And this question came up with one of the emergency medical service providers in that area. And they recounted at least 5 examples of why it was really important to them for this to come together. And so they're not someone who's ingrained in our culture. They're not someone who's ingrained in the status quo. And those are the types of folks we wanted to get radical new ideas. And so those were the folks that when we had the opportunity, we really had conversations with it so that we didn't have a status quo bias. And again, inherently, when we amplified that question and had a broad set of stakeholders, that I was surprised actually that they really talked about the value that they saw. They also, another provider highlighted us working to try to get substance use and the full continuum substance use treatment in DOC. And they're like, we don't see that in other states.
we really like that, really, that was a law enforcement partner. We really see that here. And we think that that's a value of being in HS. So I'm hoping that answered your question. I took a little bit of extra time.
Yeah. No, but to your point, it's a unified system. It's the only one in the country that's under an agency of human services. It can become difficult to coordinate it within the system. But there are many correctional systems throughout the country that their facilities are specifically designated if they're operating off a penitentiary type model or a more county type model. Those systems of care are ingrained specifically of the scope of what's being housed. And, like I said, as long as the efficiency and the accountability and the coordinated of services can really be pushed through, because we do recognize that is desperately needed, as you mentioned, it is completely practical to keep everything ingrained within AHS right now.
And that's where the tier 2 and 3, I want to reframe. The tier 2 are things that we want to work with you all too, but they're things that are much more operational. We did highlight some of those, and that's the value of this. We wanted to make sure that as we gathered information and data, we didn't just answer the structural question, but we also captured, as people talk to us about things that we can improve, the operational pieces and the programmatic pieces, that we captured those. And we do think we're an agency continuously interested in improving from a transparency standpoint. There are things that this report pointed out that are opportunities that we are committed to continue to drive forward at the programmatic level and at the organization level. So why don't we dive into those, because that's where we were going.
Thank you so much.
So is there, one more question and then we should continue on.
One last question on the process piece. Thank you so much. And I appreciate that outreach for this included and extended, beyond AHS. It was partner agencies and groups, because we are all web interwoven to try to serve, Vermonters in whichever capacity we do. Although I am, very curious, in just sheer percentage, what was the response rate from strictly AHS employees?
I have to look back to find the exact numbers, but we can get that for you.
And lastly, was every single AHS employee reached out to in this? Yeah, okay, cool, that's helpful.
And multiple times, and we tried to do it, the methodology. We tried to cast as broad a brushstroke as possible, writing it. So multiple secretary sends a monthly all staff email. So we would get data every month. We sent out a specific email about that. We asked, recognizing that some folks, depending on their schedule or whatever, maybe that's not their first priority to read. We asked departments to send their own versions. We asked supervisors to reach out. We sent out the surveys. We publicized the open comment form. We visited all of the correctional facilities, as well as our Vermont Psychiatric Care Hospital and our other DMH operated facility. We also tabled in our Waterbury office complex and visited our district offices, literally just engaged people kind of in the hallway, went to staff meetings. There was a lot of different ways for folks to provide us that kind of feedback. And some of those were casual and informal conversations that were, like, for me, some of the richest conversations were just like sitting in the lobby of our office complex and like hearing from different folks, having a conversation, people from different departments talking about one specific challenge or something like that. And Jacqueline and I were curious to take notes to more formal or more structured engagement. So that was both, that's true for both staff and for our public engagement process.
Thank you. When we have a lot to get through, so.
On the last slide there, I just want to draw out explicitly, so we kind of paused in between the tiers. The tier 3 are our actionable, smaller, discrete projects. Those are either department or program level, or maybe more discrete things that apply to the whole agency that we can just start working on. So they're not the higher level of needing to consider and prioritize developing like a large amount of resources to for continuous improvement. There's a lot of really awesome things in there that maybe easier fixes or might be just things for departments to kind of integrate into their continuous improvement work there. So we will go over and give some examples of those as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So firstly, because we have did dwell a lot on the challenges of this, it's important to just recognize our strengths. These themes on the slide here summarize the areas where we heard that AHS is successful at fulfilling its mission and meeting the needs of our clients. And we heard a lot about that. Or a lot of, hey, we do this really well. What about this other thing? Kind of stuff. We heard a lot of really awesome benefits of the agency as it is currently structured. And those are also things for us to think about as we move forward and change. Input, again, based on the input from all of our sources and some of these key themes of strength. These are resources and practices and systems that we will lead on as we go forward and move our recommendations through implementation and ongoing improvement. We want to make sure that as we do change and as we do improve, we sustain and amplify our successes. So I'm going to briefly present those to you. Okay. So for slide 8, this is the order we'll be reviewing the findings and recommendations for the rest of the presentation. You'll see for tier 2 here, the themes for revisiting AHS, that's the document we passed out to you. These are kind of like the top ones from our feedback process here in terms of the prioritizing. And these thematic areas that we passed out to you represent most of the feedback we received in some form through our analysis. Do you want to just note that by and large, the feedback we received didn't speak to broad organizational or systems change. It was focused on here's the problems I see in front of me, or here's the opportunities, or what if we did this? So there's a lot of like a really wealth of things for us to mine specific to department and program and level work there. And they really do reflect the experiences and day-to-day impacts for the people who interact with our agency, including our own staff, as well as our partners and clients. On the next few slides, we'll go over our tier 1 recommendations. Before we do that, I just want to note up front that as the secretary mentioned a little bit earlier in responding to your question, Representative, there are some commonalities among them in terms of each of the tier 1 recommendations, but they're all unique in their own way. And we came to each of them differently based on, again, on the overall evidence and feedback we received. So we looked at everything we heard, not just that, hey, we think you should move this program here, or we think we should reorganize this another way. We took a broad approach, looking at everything, both in how we identified the challenges that underlie the tier 1 recommendations, as well as where we landed ultimately in terms of what we're recommending in the report. The scope and scale of the challenges identified and the impact or urgency of each is different. And I'll try to note kind of that context as we go through. And Secretary noted that a little bit already for GOC, and we could revisit that or summarize it as well. And as we noted previously, we didn't go into conversations asking folks whether we should make structural changes. We asked what the biggest challenge is. And one last important thing about tier 1, while broadly speaking, our tier 1 recommendations include possible legislative solutions. For many of our tier 1 recommendations, we don't actually contemplate legislative solutions being the best approach to move forward. In many cases, our recommendations is that the agency takes specific steps or work to strengthen existing structures and systems. There are a few reasons for this. First, we consider the high cost of change. Jacqueline alluded to this a little bit in the methodology. This is both in terms of financial or other resource costs, as well as the potential impacts to programs and Vermont that we serve, and we take that really, really seriously. We want to make sure that whatever we do, we're maintaining the standard that we're at and improving it. There's a natural high bar to end that any challenge needs to overcome. And so in many of these cases, we want to be transparent about what we looked into, but we propose other remedies. In cases where we do contemplate legislative changes, it's important that they be made thoughtfully and systematically. Okay, so our first tier 1 is the Agency of Human Services. I just noted that a lot of our feedback wasn't structural in nature, but it's probably not surprising that we did hear a fair amount of feedback that directly addresses this question. And that's because the context of us approaching, say, our staff for a meeting, they saw, oh, this is an act about, re-envisioning the Agency of Human Services. So that was what the clear focus of the act was for our participants. And there was a lot of really well-reasoned and valuable comments, both for keeping the agency as one and for dividing the organization with a variety of different models considered. We heard a lot about challenges and opportunities that, while they didn't reference organizational questions directly, they have bearing on the overall question of the agency's organization. we're listing some of the challenges we identified here on the slide. However, far more often, we heard that the agency is stronger and better able to meet the needs of Vermonters as a single unified agency. And we heard less specifically whether to change the structure and more about the need to improve the coordination and integration of the current system, and the opportunities for us to do that. And you'll see reflected to address what you see reflected on the slide, and which splitting up the organization won't necessarily solve. We're happy to dive deeper into any of these if you would like, but we have some recommendations on our next slide. So much of what we do and how we do it is dependent on alignment of services across the course of the life course of Vermonters, and how to meet their varied experiences and needs and for the communities that we all belong to. From behind the scenes work on budget and policy to on the ground direct interactions with clients, their experience is better when we have fewer barriers to overcome in how we support Vermont. And we heard from participants among all types of groups who engaged with us, from general staff comments to field staff discussion groups, to meetings with advocates and clients, and interviews with current and former leaders within AHS and other state agencies and departments. So let's really break down barriers, find ways to streamline, work together better. And then finally, we really just looked at the question of like, would a different org chart solve the problem, and would that be worth the cost? And the cost of splitting AHS would be too high, both in actual financials and in the disruption and organizational impact on staff, and most importantly, in the impact and outcomes for clients and communities. So what our recommendation is that we strengthen, keep AHS together and strengthen as a unified agency. Strengthening AHS's internal structures and systems positions the agency to pivot quickly in emergent situations without encountering unnecessary structural barriers, we also just experienced really broad support, even in the context of like diving deep into critical challenges, that we consistently heard that addressing the coordination internally would be more beneficial rather than restructuring. So the next item that we discussed or looked into in terms of our tier 1 recommendations is the Department for Children and Families. We didn't hear as much structural feedback directly from participants as we did with the Agency of Human Services. We heard a lot about the broad scope of work in DCF and about how its scope impacts the experience of staff and clients. Much of the work of DCF, including ESD and the Economic Services Division and Family Service Division, is highly invisible. It involves direct interaction with a large population of children and families across Vermont. And it's not surprising, therefore, that we heard frequently about DCF in nearly all groups and methods during our information gathering. It was a very common topic, even if we were speaking about like more of those operational focused questions. Many divisions and programs from DCF are represented in the field, and coordination of services is essential. However, there are some clear differences in the type of work that's done by various divisions that leads to silos and operations. We often heard largely from DCF and other AHS staff that employees of the Field Services Division and the Economic Services Division sometimes identify much more closely with their divisions than as DCF as a whole. This is unique to DCF as compared to other parts of the agency. For example, Dale employees would say, I'm a Dale employee. And oftentimes, if you ask DCF, they'll identify them as belonging to their division. We've observed that the quote unquote walls between these divisions, which are also the largest divisions in AHS, are high, which impacts the various experience of those who work with or interact with DCF. And so there was a sort of natural impetus for us to look at whether a different organization structure might be worthwhile. There's also some question of the brand, right? We have, we're unique in Vermont in that we have both economic services offered as part of the Department for Children and Families and family services. Many other states split that up and have either two agency or department level organizations. So and we have them all in one department. We fully investigated this in terms of what the potential, what potential other models would look like and all of that. But again, we need to look from the method, the measure of DCF serves some of our most vulnerable Vermonters. They do really, really critical work. There's a lot there's that, again, high cost, both in terms of resources and potential impacts. So our recommendation is that we really need to invest some time and effort into strengthening DCF. The feedback, again, was really about like, how can we improve things? So it really makes sense for us to work on trying to break down some of those barriers, trying to work on making sure that the coordination is very tight between the different parts of DCF that works together, investing and strengthening the department and some of its leadership operations in terms of providing the capacity to manage what is a very, very large department within our agency. So at this point, while we didn't investigate whether a structural change would be warranted as part of the charge of this report, we are not recommending changing how DCF is structured at this time. Okay. Our third tier 3 or tier 1, excuse me, recommendation is about mental health integrations. We currently have a lot of services for substance use and mental health offered by both the Department of Mental Health and also the Health Department. The systems, and so as the Secretary mentioned earlier in responding to your question, alluded to in responding to your question, Representative, about DOC, we did hear quite frequently that we need to improve the way we coordinate services in substance use and mental health, and that there are some challenges there in duplication of services, siloed systems, and that a lot of coordination work is needed to be done there. This input showed up in conversations with organizations and groups, as well as people working directly in the field, as well as comments in VDH and DMH staff. And I just want to reflect what the Secretary mentioned earlier. There's not unanimity about what the best option is here. There are strong perspectives depending on who you ask about how this should work. But there's clear agreement across those perspectives that we need to make progress in solving the problem if you think from the perspective of the client. For example, there are 2 different provider systems and 2 different billing systems, which means that I think like folks who struggle with mental health and substance abuse are some of our most vulnerable Vermonters. They may also struggle with lack of housing. They, in many cases, multiple parts of the agency touch some of our most vulnerable Vermonters. And so providing a system that is as streamlined and seamless as possible for them is really, really difficult. You're talking about people really trying to navigate a tough situation in their life, right? And so from our perspective, we really need to sort of solve the underlying challenge. And here is where we do make a structural recommendation, which is that we should integrate clinical and substance use functions into DMH. Again, here the focus is on coherence, thinking about the perspective of the client, and making sure that we are improving the standard of care experienced in the field there and reducing the barriers. So we talked a little bit about this already. Our last tier 1 recommendation is related to DOC. And as the Secretary mentioned, we heard some perspective that's really I'm just going to mirror the way you asked the question, Representative, in terms of should DOC be somewhere else. We did hear some perspective about that. We spoke to a broad group of DOC employees. We went to all of our correctional facilities and basically Jacqueline and I sat with as many corrections officers as we possibly could in those visits, and asked a lot of questions. We also spoke to probation and parole units, DOC, excuse me, central office folks. We did not hear universally, and we were prepared for this question because in doing our pre-work research, we looked into the previous conversations about structural change. So we knew that there had been thoughts or questions or suggestions about moving DOC or making DOC its own agency. And we did hear some of that. But what we did really hear really specifically was we have a lot of challenges at DOC. I know that these committees have heard a lot about DOC and the various challenges that they face. So we heard a lot of very tactical operational feedback from line folks, concerns about scheduling, concerns about staffing. I think we've all heard those from DOC, and I'm sure DOC this year would be happy to talk more about that with you. We have a lot of what we think of as tier 3 recommendations that were things for DOC to work on. And I got to say, from getting to know DOC as part of this process, is something they already think a lot about. So we did hear some questions about whether or not DOC as the largest department, I think, in state government would make sense somewhere else. And because we heard that, we went in scoping it and looking into it. The secretary kind of go to the next slide. The secretary did go into some of what we came down on already and did it more eloquently, frankly, than I'm going to be able to do it here. But we see a huge amount of benefits from having DOC be part of the Agency of Human Services. Again, thinking about the cost of change, impact to services of a population of vulnerable Vermonters, impact to staff and staffing levels, which are something that's a key consideration of any kind of change, as well as the ability for integration with the other departments within the Agency of Human Services. We are not, for those reasons, recommending movement at this time. I'll give you some really, really just very granular examples of why. We heard, we had a focus group with the managers, and I'm going to forget which of our field service offices it was. We had a focus group with the managers or the division, with the directors for this field services region from each of our departments. That's the health department, the family services division at DCF, the economic services at DCF, DOC's probation and parole. And I think we had higher ability there in the health department. So we had a good group of folks. And the DOC, the director from the DOC unit of the probation and parole unit, and that field service just talked about how important and critical the relationships with their colleagues in the room, with family services, with economic services were to doing their job, and how much they worked together. And that's not to say that if they were part of another agency, they couldn't necessarily build those, but the entire focus of that conversation was how can we strengthen? How can we make it better? How can we work better together? And so from our perspective, the remedy to the challenge we're seeing is to strengthen the existing structure and streamline rather than making a structural change. That makes sense.
Of course it makes sense because when you dug deeper and probably look at what the fiscal number would have been to remove it out of that department, I find it hard to believe coming into legislation saying, hey, by the way, we want to remove DOC, we need $100 million. That's pretty.
I think this is the end of the tier 1 recommendations.
Yes.
So I want to give you the opportunity to talk a lot to see if you want us to keep going into tier 3 or whether we want to pause.
Not seeing any emergent questions right this moment. So.
We wanted to give you because of the challenge of the report, we wanted to give you a good accounting of all of our tier 1s specifically. But we're going to give a more high level overview of our tier 2 and tier 3, and we'd be happy to talk more as we go through the process. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. One of the things that I particularly appreciated in the approach is that the agency took the opportunity to be thinking about this very holistically, not just the charge that was put in Act 119, but, what are we going to do with what we learn? We're making this big effort, so we should use it as an opportunity to learn about the experiences of our staff, of the people who we interact with, our community providers, of the people who receive services. And so I appreciate that and appreciate, some of the themes that have arisen, I think probably for most of us probably aren't surprising. And we'll be, looking to see, how do we move from there? What's the engagement that we have back, the feedback process back? It's always good to have collected, analyzed, assessed, developed themes. And then how do we respond back to all of those people who took the time and the effort to participate in the process, to let them know, what are we doing with the information that you shared with us and the time you took to do that?
I was just concerned, I'm very pleased with your recommendations, regarding, substance use being integrated with, DMH. Is there any legislative, do you need anything legislatively to?
So I don't want to get out over my skis here.
I was just gonna say. And it's also wasn't, I think it's important that you said at the outright, there, it wasn't consensus necessarily about that.
For this one, it's gonna, the big thing is gonna matter the how we do it. I've been around for a long time. I can't believe how much gray hair I have at this point. We did this once before where we put substance use mental health into Department of Health. And there were some real lessons learned related to that. Putting it into a larger department, a lot of the folks felt like we lost the mental health focus. And that's why we actually why this made more sense, because it would actually amplify substance use rather than make it so that it was less of a focus. We also learned that time that how you make these types of organizational changes really matters. We put folks together, but we didn't really achieve integration. And that's, if we do that again, it's not worth it. The whole point here is to change the way that we provide services, integrated payment models, integrated measurement, making sure that individuals can go, if they choose, that their mental health, the provider that they see for mental health is doing mental health counseling, also their substance use counseling. So they don't have to go to two separate folks. And so for this one, I think it really does matter. But your question was, I don't want to get out over my skis whether we need legislation. I know it's something that's been contemplated, or it's being contemplated this year. When we looked into it, the last time, there are a few ways this can be done. I don't have the authority to do it myself. With it as the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services. I can't speak legally, but when we investigated, a couple of options would be at the beginning of a biennium, the governor could do it, or it needs to be done by the legislature. It would require us to do more investigation to find out all of the options, but that's what we found the last time that we looked at it. So two things there, a couple of options of how to do it. We want to do it soon. It likely would take legislation. Second, the how really matters, so that we do it well and do it right this time.
I'll get to you just a second, Daisy. I think it's really important, when you said the how, and that, using our sort of past experiences, I too was around for the mental health, change, and the Dale change. I think that some would argue that the Dale change hasn't always and may not also be successful on the developmental services side when DMH and DDS were separated into two separate departments. And mostly around, they utilize the same provider system. And so that has made it cumbersome in terms of oversight and accountability for those agencies, as well as implementation of things that go across that service provider system. So Representative Echo.
I just wanted to add that I did introduce a short form bill to integrate DSU with DMH. So if you should need any legislation, there is a placeholder for you.
One of the things that we can talk about is for when we've dug into the data, and we can have the departments come back and share it, as many as 80% of the individuals in both of these systems have co-occurred. That's why this makes sense. They're being asked, some of the folks with the most complex lives are being asked to navigate two systems that are separate. We are one of 5 states that keeps them separate. So remember, we looked into what other states do. We are one of 5 states. So we are in the minority
of states that keeps these systems as separate systems of care.
Representative Chima.
I heard you say you don't want to give over your skis. I don't ski. I assume that means like you don't want to fall because we're asking you to jump ahead of yourself. But just to this topic of combining, acknowledging co-occurring, something that I'm wondering if it would be useful for the legislature to consider moving forward is the way we silo things between the Health and Human Services Committee. Like, does it make sense for substance use to sort of continue to be in a separate committee from the rest of healthcare? Maybe this session we don't change it, but like in the future, should future legislators consider that at the very least so that there's more coordinated policy from the legislative level?
I'll leave that to the legislature to comment. But I will say, that some of our biggest successes in our substance use are now in acknowledging substance use as a healthcare issue. I was around and helped kick off Hub and Spoke. And it's fundamentally changed the healthcare system. I can't just stop there. I want to be really clear. It's fundamentally changed the way that we deliver services for individuals who are experiencing opioid use disorder. It acknowledged it's a chronic healthcare condition. It destigmatized it, made so they could get care in their primary care practices in the healthcare system. It really acknowledged that substance use is not human failing, but instead is a health condition that we can serve and that we can treat equitably, and then we can treat with dignity and compassion. And so I think it's a good question. I'll leave it for you all to contemplate. It is challenging for us to sometimes navigate the fact that mental health and substance use, who we see as health things, are in two separate places, which does contribute to different payment systems, different evaluation approaches, different ways that we deliver services. So it's a good question. I'll leave that to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We can go in as much or as little as you like in this in the interest of time. I just want to kind of orient folks using the slide in front of you. You also have the full list of tiers in front of you. And again, that can also be found on our website. It's in the report as well. So the themes, there are 21 themes that we identified through the process of looking into basically our first phase, as Jacqueline mentioned earlier, of the broad brush strokes of outreach and engagement. Those break down into 6 high-level categories. Those are at the top of the slide with little arrows: strength and alignment, capacity, use resources wisely, etc. And all of the 21 themes fit into one of those categories. To answer your question, Representative, when we did the prioritization and did kind of like our second set of public outreach, we asked people to basically say what are the most important. We asked for like the top 5 or 6, right? To rank. We asked us to rank.
Yeah.
Pick the most important ones to them, and we again can share that survey with you after the fact. And that generated the list below. So the prioritization on the second half of the slide there are the 5 priorities of those total 21 themes. They were the top 10. These 5 priorities were in the top 10 in both the internal and external prioritization surveys. So we asked staff, we had a comment form for staff and then a prioritization survey for staff. We had an open comment form for the public and then a prioritization survey for the public. We wanted to see where there was difference between what staff thought for the priorities and what the public thought were the priorities. So I'm going to read them because I think they're important for us to just kind of keep top of mind as we go forward. So the first one from our prioritization is make sure groups we fund are effective. Include staff and clients early in planning. Make sure we work towards the same goals. Make it easier to understand available services and better connect programs, services, and technology. So some of these are things that, they're all big things for us to work on. Some of them are things that we're already working on. Right around the time I joined the agency and we started this process, we made some changes to the way the leadership team of the agency functions and operates to be more collaborative Secretary Samuelson mentioned, the executive leadership team of the agency and kind of its like formal process of making sure that all of the commissioners of the departments are together at the table when we make executive decisions on behalf of the agency in terms of direction and budget and things like that. And so this really, that's just a good example and among many others of work that is already in progress. So thinking about next steps, and I'm jumping down a little bit, because we do have a next step slide. We have a lot of work to look at what we learned and map it against what we already have work in terms of work in progress and figure out like, what are the things we're going to tackle first and what are we already on? And then figure out how we move forward in that. And that's kind of the beginning of the process where we made sure we finished our project, got the legislative report done, and we now have like a next phase of Act 119 in terms of how we move this project forward.
And can I further the
Please.
example, because I think, Chair, for you, it goes to your question of, if we're gonna do this work, I didn't just want a report that we put on the shelf. And Ted's example, I think I'm hoping that you'll see reflected in this legislative session. The executive leadership team, I've been on it at the agency previously administrations. We've always met. But this year, we went through seeing these results and also knowing that it was a goal for better integration of our agency and collaboration. We created an executive leadership team, we created a charter, everybody does that. But we also said for the process this year, when we were developing our budget, we went through a different process. And hopefully when we come in to talk about budget, we'll walk through that, but we won't get ahead of the budget, which will be released next week. But the way that we did it is we tasked each of our leaders and we said, you have two roles in our agency. You're an executive leadership team member who leads this agency, and you are a commissioner of your department. Those two things don't always go hand in hand, but you need to do that. So we have one agency budget. We have, each department has money that funds their programs, but we have one agency budget. We're going to do a budget process this year that reflects that goal that we are one agency. And the first thing that we did was we went through all of the Medicaid programs and we looked at which ones had evaluation data, how long ago they've been evaluated, what that data actually showed us, which programs were effective, which weren't, and we presented that back to the executive leadership team. We also set priorities and we said, what are our priorities as an agency? We know some of them: housing, mental health, substance use, our healthcare, and making sure that we have a strong and healthy workforce within our agency. And then when we went to the budget process, instead of giving each department a target, the executive leadership team established the budget as an agency this year, not as department budgets. Fundamentally changed the way that our commissioners look at programs. So instead of being responsible, many of you have probably seen it before and tell you it happened in the agency when I've been in it, where one department's like, I'm gonna shut off this program, but I know it's gonna impact the other part of the program. I'm gonna leave it to the secretary's office to sort that out. We didn't do that this year. They made decisions as a commissioners group about what things were effective, what things we wanted to invest in, what our priorities were. That is a fundamental change so that we can achieve some of the goals that are here on this budget. And I ask you to continuously ask us where we're doing that, but we are looking at every single one of our teams to make sure that they are working and that they understand that they are both department and that they are leadership within our agency. It's changing the processes. Actually, I believe will change the way that the services are delivered on the ground. And so it may sound ethereal, but it was very tangible, the way that we did it this year and how it is impacting the way that our departments are thinking about themselves, not as individuals, but across each other. And that's, a directly related to the work that we've done here. It's directly related to the feedback that we've heard from legislators and other people over the last 5 or 10 years.
I think having the taking action that, key individuals in leadership positions view themselves as part of each and every department and program and constituent group and not just their own. I think that is, I think that's good progress.
And they made decisions together, not decisions where each department presented a budget. They built that budget together. And I'm hopeful that as we ask for concessions this year, like coming in
present our budgets to you, and we ask to do that as all of the departments together. That it will help us so that we can represent every single department. But it also represents that level of collaboration. You saw that last year when we did our substance use proposals. Those proposals last year, that was some of the work to get this done, but not for this session, but last session, even more for this session. They developed those proposals as a unit, and as housing proposals were developed that way, rather than a department like DCF being responsible for it. Every single one of those commissioners sat at the table, or their staff sat at the table to develop both the budget and those programmatic proposals. It is a fundamental change in the way that we do our work.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this information. This is really enlightening. Do you currently, or are you building mechanisms to look across the agency to find out what is currently working well, and then being able to duplicate that across the agency or departments, for example? You know, like, I work in state government, full transparency, and there are certain divisions that do things really well. They do communication well, they do service coordination well. So like, are you building that out in the outset to kind of, rather than building it all new, hey, you know, so-and-so is doing this really well, can we just get that across the whole division, the agency, or at least the department?
It's a work in progress, but yes, that's what we do in matrix organization. I think Ted was just said we were going to give an example.
I was just saying, we actually learned a lot of what is going well as part of this. So part of our process, next steps is going to be like, hey, you should go look at the example of this department or this division or this program within this, you know, one of your colleague departments, because they have a good solution to this problem. We also have an ongoing process of continuous improvement and sharing of lessons. Like, so I want to be transparent, like that is a lot of the work that Jacqueline leads on behalf of the agency, and every department has their own continuous improvement and performance improvement folks. And this will be useful. A lot of this will be useful to that, but there is, I think your question also gets us like, what will we need to do on top of it? And the answer is we don't quite know yet. We're still in the process of digging into the tier 2s and tier 3s and figuring it out. So there may be things, additional things that we do or undertake or that are in response to this.
But the process helped us identify those like beacons we see for as well.
And if I could just follow up, I think I love the tier 2s and 3s, because those are things that internally the agency can continually work on, right? And I think for me personally, it would be really helpful if you all come back at some period of time and give maybe some timeframes around some of the tier 2 and 3. So there's some like goals around like, okay, these are things we identified, or things that we can do internally without legislative approval, and it's within our purview to do them. How long will it take for us to do that? And then that way you'll have targets. I think it would really help with staff morale that, you know, we're working towards continuous improvement with real targets and benchmarks in place, with an idea of what we're kind of moving towards.
We'd be happy to come back and share progress updates with all of you. We also have to we need to give some updates to our staff and also seek staff feedback on sort of where we landed and what we're thinking for next steps. So more to come.
They were almost out of time.
Yeah, I just was, no, that's all fine. Good check in.
I just want to,
I'm just gonna check in with Chair if she had to.
No,
Yeah,
no questions from
okay.
any.
I just wanted to say that the tier 3, we've kind of, I think, already got over that. But the tier 3 examples, some of the examples are on there. We have spreadsheets worth of them that we're going to be working on, chunking out, and some are specific to departments. There's one that isn't on the slide that I just think is really awesome. Change the call center hold music. Small example. No, but seriously, we have people who are on hold. We have people who are on hold for hours. And we hear it from more than one person, you know, so, but this is an example of like the level of granularity and specificity of like things that will make a difference for people who may have to be on the phone.
Is it the hours or the call user?
This one was specific. Yeah, this is specific to the music.
You're gonna have playing Don't Stop Believing by Journey?
You should like have
I
content or something.
don't know, but I think that the goal there is the level of granularity of types of examples. Yeah. So turning it back over to you, I know we're at time.
Yes. Thank you. We could go a lot of different places with that, Ted, so I think. Thank you. Thank all three of you and, to those folks listening, thank you, out there to the, over 1,000 folks who participated in the process and, what you're hearing from the administration is that this is part of a continuous quality improvement process and, the feedback loops need to be continual and, often. And we look forward to seeing the sort of revised budget presentations that we'll start to see next week and look forward to the collaborative nature of your executive leadership team as we take a look at those and dive deep into them. And as you know, we've, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee sent out some guidance back in October about how we are going to be changing our process a bit as well. And hopefully they don't collide, but they complement each other. So thank you all for being here. And unless anybody else has anything else.